Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first daily dose of Universes Beyond Assassin's Creed spoilers. So if you haven't heard about the Assassin's Creed set, it's kind of a unique one. So it is a small set, around 100 cards, and it's released in mini boosters, 7 card booster packs, although you get more cards in collector boosters for some reason. The twist is also, the set is legal in Modern, which is something we haven't seen with like Universes Beyond Doctor Who, Universes Beyond Warhammer, so this one is actually going to be Modern legal, and today was the first day of spoilers. Watsy kicked it off with a stream, and we have about 1 million cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking exciting new Assassin's Creed cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Universes Beyond Assassin's Creed. So we kick things off today in the world of Assassins. The set's kind of broken down, as far as I can tell, into Assassins versus Knights and then other stuff, more or less. And I will warn you right now, some of these pronunciations probably going to be rough because these names are ridiculous. But we kick things off with Basim. So Basim, 2-mana 2/2, it's a legendary human assassin. It says whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card, and it can't be blocked this turn. And this ability triggers only once each turn. Historic spells, of course, artifacts, legends, and sagas, and then when it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So obviously, if you're playing a commander deck that's full of historic spells, a legendary theme deck, an artifact deck, an equipment deck, this does work pretty well with equipment, right? You can like cast an equipment to be a historic spell to make it unblockable, have equipment on it to get in a hit with your swords or whatever. This card is at least in the conversation, but this is one of the few cards from the set that I actually think could have modern potential. It works really well with cheap artifacts. Imagine turn 2 you Basim, play a Mishra's Bauble. That triggers Basim, so you get to draw an extra card, and then you get to draw off Mishra's Bauble as well. The next turn, maybe you play another Mishra's Bauble. You trigger Basim, you draw a card, Basim's unblockable, you get in, you start growing it. So you can see how this card can really snowball in the right deck. It also plays pretty well with Suku, the new hotness thanks to Nadu in Modern, so maybe there's some deck that's playing Suku along with Nadu, along with Basim. We'll have to wait and see how it shakes out. So Basim, in the right deck, seems like a pretty powerful and efficient threat. We also have Layla Hassan. So Layla Hassan, 4-mana 3/4, it's a white legendary human assassin. It is first strike, and when it enters a battlefield, or whenever one or more assassins you control deals combat damage to a player, you return a historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So Layla, this card, I think, is more of a 99 style card. At 4 mana, it's just too expensive for Modern. I would be very, very surprised if this was seen play in Modern, but I think of this as like a weird, sort of expensive, but potentially repeatable Eternal Witness for historic decks. So like legendary themed decks like Joda or Dahada, or maybe artifact decks, an Urza deck, a Brea deck. In this deck, you're essentially paying a 1-mana tax on Eternal Witness. Of course, you can only get back historic spells, but if your theme is legends or your theme is artifacts, most of your important cards are probably gonna be historic spells anyway. So you're getting this expensive Eternal Witness effect, but then because Layla is an assassin, if you happen to get in a hit with it, you get to Eternal Witness again, which seems kind of powerful. So I wouldn't want to build a deck around this as a commander, and like I said before, it's just too expensive and slow for Modern, but in the right commander deck, I could see it having some uses. We also got a new banned human assassin scientist in Shaun and Rebecca Agent, and I gotta say, this looks like a Doctor Who card to me. I mean, 2 British people just sitting there living their lives, you know, surfing the web. Definitely a little bit of Doctor Who vibes, but the card itself, 4-mana 4/4 Vigilance. When it ETBs, you search your graveyard, hand, and library for a card named the Animus, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle, then you can tap it to make a colorless mana, and when you do, you get to mill 2 cards. So what is the Animus, you wonder? The Animus is a 2-mana legendary artifact. This says at the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 target legendary creature card from a graveyard with a memory counter on it, and then you can tap it, and until end of turn, target legendary creature you control becomes a copy of target creature card in exile with a memory counter on it, activate only as a sorcery. So this card, I mean, it's not going to see Modern play, but it could be like an interesting commander build around, I guess, where you're using Shauna to tutor up the Animist, and then I think what you're really looking for is legendary creatures that have activated abilities or attack triggers. Remember, because the Animist is going to already be on the battlefield, or the creature that you're targeting with the Animist is already going to be on the battlefield, you're not going to get ETB triggers out of this. So copying things with ETBs don't do anything, but imagine like having your Shaun and Rebecca, and you get your Animist, and you get an Italian in the graveyard, and then you turn Shaun and Rebecca into a Tally Primal Storm. You attack, you get a bunch of free cards from your opponent's deck, or you turn Shaun and Rebecca into something like Grizzlebrand, where you draw a ton of cards. So I think those are the kind of synergies you're looking for with this card. Like I said, Modern, probably not going to make it, but in Commander it does seem fun. We also got Bayek of Siwa, a 5-mana 3/4 Boros human assassin. It has double strike. It says as long as it's your turn, other historic creatures you control have double strike, and then you can disguise it for 3. So you can play it face down for 3 as a 2/2 with Ward 2, flip it up for 3 mana anytime. Interestingly, this card breaks the morph rule. I don't know if you know this. I don't know how well known this is, but there's a rule about morph cards and face down cards that if your unmorphing ability costs less than 5 mana, you shouldn't be able to trade with something that's bigger than a 2/2. Basically, they don't want you flipping up morphs and killing your opponent's creatures by surprise, unless you're spending a lot of mana to unmorph or undisguise the creature. Baika kind of breaks this rule, although I guess that rule is mostly for standard and limited, so it probably doesn't matter since this is a modern set and a commander set. The card itself, it's intriguing, right? Like, again, in a deck full of historic things, it's kind of powerful. Like, even only during your turn, giving all your historic creatures double strike can deal a lot of damage. It's kind of like a Blade Historian for your historic stuff, but you get a better body and it's easier to cast. I could see this showing up maybe in Winota decks. Winota kind of cares about this, being able to tutor it out with your Winota hits and give your historic things double strike. The only concern I have is, in Winota, is enough of your stuff going to be historic for this to work? So you might have to build around it a little bit to make sure this is good enough. If you're not giving most of your team double strike, then I think Bayek kind of loses a lot of its utility. On the other hand, if you're just playing some sort of straight up Legends deck like Jodah the Unifier, this card seems kind of ridiculous because Jodah just floods the board with Legends so quickly. Giving your entire team that's being pumped by Jodah double strike is just going to kill people super quick. Also could be interesting in decks that can make a lot of artifact creatures. One of the first ones I thought of is General Ferrus Rockerick, which whenever you cast a multicolor spell, like Bayek, you get a 4/4 red and white Golem artifact creature token. So since it's an artifact, it's historic, so you cast a bunch of multicolor things, make a bunch of these artifact tokens, use Bayek to give them all double strike, just one-shot someone and kill them. So I think that's what you're trying to do with Bayek. Again, a little bit expensive for Modern, I think. I would be surprised. Maybe the Winota deck might be the best bet, but cool in Commander decks for sure. We also got Connor, apparently. I've learned that the English name of this character is apparently Connor Ratonhnhake. I know I am butchering this so badly, but it's a 3-mana 3/3 legendary human assassin. It says as long as it hasn't dealt damage yet, it has hexproof and can't be blocked. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you make a 1/1 black assassin creature token with menace. When you do, you can return an equipment card from your graveyard to the battlefield and attach it to the token. So Connor, or Ratonhnhake, however you pronounce it, is kind of an interesting option. So it reminds me a little bit of Forge Anew. Forge Anew kind of does the equipment reanimator thing and the free equip thing. Connor kind of does the same thing, right? If you're looking to cheat a Colossus Hammer into play, you can get it in your graveyard, you can play this, you get in the attack with it, it's going to be unblockable and hexproof, so it should get in that one attack. Then you get the token, put the Colossus Hammer on it, hopefully use that to win the game. You could also go the other direction and just cheat like Caldra compete into play, and other massive living weapon style equipment. Is this enough to let it see Modern play? I don't know, like it does work pretty well with stuff like Stoneforge. The other upside we have here is as long as it hasn't dealt damage, it's hexproof and can't be blocked. So what this means is you can in theory get this on the battlefield, use your Stoneforges to find your hammers and your swords, load it all up, and then just set up this one big unblockable hexproof attack to close out the game. Kind of like this weird Boggle strategy, where rather than trying to use the second ability repeatedly to make a bunch of assassins and reanimate a bunch of equipment, maybe you just turn this into a one-shot cannot kill unblockable hexproof threat to kill your opponent in one attack. So it's close enough that I think it could be worth trying in Modern. Might be like a one of in some sort of Esper Hammer time build or something. It also is interesting in Commander with blink effects. If you blink it, you're able to reset the first mode, right? Like it's a new version of itself. So it hasn't dealt damage, it has hexproof, it can't be blocked. So it works really well with like Sword of Hearth and Home. You can put the sword on it, you can attack, do the sword's ability, tutor out a basic land, and then use sword to blink it and reset it. So again, it's going to be hexproof and unblockable. So the next turn you put the sword on it, maybe some other stuff on it. Gonna be at its best if you can free equip, because blinking it is going to take all the equipment off of it, which is a drawback. But if you have some free equip shenanigans like Pure Steel Paladin, it could be a really cool way to build the deck. We also got a new Grixis legendary human assassin pirate in Edward Kenway. So Edward Kenway, 5 mana 5/5. It says at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each tapped assassin, pirate, and or vehicle you control. And then whenever a vehicle you control deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down, and you may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Worth noting on that last ability, it doesn't fix your mana for it. So you can't spend mana as always mana of any color, which we see in a lot of these abilities. Although I think the idea is you should be able to cast the cards that you thieve, with the first ability making treasure tokens that are going to make mana of any color. So just keep that in mind though, it doesn't actually fix your mana. So Edward Kenway, I think this is actually a really powerful commander card. It's kind of like Ragavan, right? When you really think about it, you're kind of building your own Ragavan where you're making treasures and stealing your opponent's cards to cast with those treasures, except this is kind of turning all of your vehicles essentially, and kind of pirates and assassins too, but especially vehicles into Ragavans. So when you think about this card, there's a few directions you can go with it. You can build a like mismatch of pirates and assassins and vehicles and just play good stuff of all of them. One of the big upsides here, remember, you need to have your creatures be tapped to make the treasures with Edward, which is the most powerful thing this can do, is like make a ton of treasures. But vehicles kind of solve this problem. If you're worried about having your creatures be tapped, you can just use any vehicle to crew all of your creatures, tap all your team, and then you'll make a ton of treasures. So I could see some sort of like assassin vehicle deck. The other way to build this, and this might be the easiest way, is just straight up make it a vehicle deck and not worry so much about pirates or assassins. And this might be the best commander for trying to pull off like Mech Titan core shenanigans. So that seems like a really fun way to build around this card. So I expect this will be a pretty popular vehicle commander. It also could show up in the 99 of existing pirates decks, like Admiral Beckett Brass, for example, Don Andres. They're in the right colors to just run Edward in the 99. And in a dedicated pirate deck, you're usually trying to go pretty wide with pirates, and then you can just like attack to get your team tapped, and then play Edward, make a ton of treasures on your end step to just have an explosive turn in the future, leave up interaction on your opponent's turn. So Edward, I think this one will probably be a popular build around commander, and also should show up in the 99 of some other pirate decks. We also got Roshan Hidden Magister. So this is a 4 mana 4/4 legendary human assassin. It says other creatures you control are assassins in addition to their other types. The same is true of creature spells you control and creature cards that you own that aren't on the battlefield. So all of your creatures are going to be assassins and their other stuff. And then face down creatures you control have menace. And when a permanent you control is turn face up, you draw a card and lose a life. This card is very, very strange. So I think the intent of this card is to kind of be like a conspiracy, right? We've seen a ton of cards so far. Almost all of them care about assassins in one way or another. This is a way that you can turn all of your non-assassins creatures into assassins. Ideally, if you're building an assassin deck, you're not going to have a lot of non-assassin creatures, so I don't know how useful that mode will be, but I can imagine there's a deck that maybe you have some mana dorks or utility creatures, a Dockside or a Snapcaster or something, and this is a way that you can turn that into an assassin to benefit from assassin synergies. The more intriguing part of this card to me, something I really wasn't expecting from this set, was face down support. So I think the actual best home for this card is going to be in the 99 of some face down decks like Kadena Slinking Sorcerer, the Morph deck, or Atrata Deadly Fugitive, which is also putting things into play face down. In a deck like that, this has a lot of value. This just sits out. It gives all of your face down things menace so they can get in damage. And then as you're flipping your things face up, which you should be doing pretty consistently with your commander, you're also going to start to draw a ton of cards, which is really, really strong. So yes, you can play it in Assassins, but I actually think this is almost even better as like a weird morph support card. We also got a bunch of lower rarity support cards for an Assassins deck. We got some 3-mana cantripping card draw creatures like Anawal, Lydia Fry, let you surveil a bunch on your end step if you have tapped Assassins. Brothers at Headquarters, probably going to be key mana fixing for an Assassin deck, just a land that makes a mana for any color for Assassins. And then we have Free Running. Free Running is a mechanic that seems specifically designed to work with Assassins. So Free Running is a mechanic where it gives your spells an alternate casting cost. Take, for example, Chain Assassination, which is a 4-mana instant that says destroy target creature. If another creature died this turn, draw a card. But it has Free Running of 2 mana, 1 and a black, and you can cast the spell for its free running cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with an assassin or, for some reason, your commander, which very awkward on a modern side. I really don't like that this gives the commander exception. I feel like it should just be for assassins. If I got a word for WotC here, it's that it's okay if not every card goes in every single commander deck. That's actually fine. It's actually better for commander. I don't know if you realize this, but commander is actually at its best when you can't put every card in every deck. Actually, I know that Wizards know this because Mark Rosewater talks about it a lot, how restrictions breed creativity. I think that free running to me, it really rubs me the wrong way with that commander edition on there because it's removing a restriction and you don't need to be able to play every card in every deck. We want less of that. Regardless though, if you're playing an assassin deck, I think these cards are really good. Like, when this is 4 mana, blow up a creature, maybe draw a card, it's pretty bad. But at 2 mana, it's actually pretty good. Same with, like, District of Guards, 3 mana to make 3 1/1 white human rogue creature tokens, which is kind of a fine, if unexciting rate. But when you free run it for 2 mana, that's actually pretty above the curve. So these are cards that I think basically just round out your assassin deck. Moving on to the world of knights. We start with what might be one of the better modern cards we've seen so far in Shay Cormac. So Shay Cormac, in Orzhov 2 mana 1/1 legendary human knight rogue, you can pay 1, impermanence your opponent's control, lose hexproof, indestructible, protection shroud, and ward until end of turn. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes a target of a spell or ability you control, you put a bounty counter on it. And then when a creature with a bounty counter on it dies, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on Shay Cormac. So why is this card potentially exciting for modern? And it's really that first ability, right? The ability to make your opponent's stuff lose hexproof and ward and shroud. This means you can get rid of indestructibility on the One Ring or Ulamog, so you can just kill it with a normal removal spell. You can get rid of the ward on Vein Ripper. You can get rid of protection on Core Firewalker. So I don't think this is like a 4 of main deck card or anything like that, but that first ability is unique enough. If you end up with a deck or in a meta where getting rid of hexproof or indestructible protection is actually super important, I think this card is actually just one of the best options that we have, and it's only 2 mana, so it's pretty efficient. One thing I did want to point out about Shay is if you read that first ability, it makes permanence your opponent's control lose their keywords, not your opponent themselves. So what this means is you're not going to get rid of the protection on the One Ring. If your opponent plays a One Ring and they get protection for a turn, your Shay can remove the indestructibility from the One Ring, but it's not going to be able to remove the protection from your opponent. So you're not going to be able to get around that with Shay, but I still think this card could serve a purpose in the sideboard. The other interesting aspect of this card is just playing as like a removal snowball card. So let's say you got Shay down. Your opponent has a creature. You cast a Fatal Push. That's going to be a spell that's targeting a creature your opponent controlled to put a bounty counter on it. And then the Fatal Push is going to kill that creature. It'll die. You'll get 2 counters on Shay. And there's no restriction on this, right? Obviously, you need creatures to kill. You need removal spells in hand. But it's not like it's a once per turn trigger. So in theory, you could like play this and then Fatal Push something, Lightning Bolt something, and end up with a 5/5 real quick. So this does turn into a legitimately big creature. Unfortunately, it does start off in Bowmaster's range, which is kind of an issue, but still it can snowball once it gets going. As far as Commander is concerned, I think it's a cool option for decks that care about bounty counters. So we don't have a lot of these, right? But like Mathis Fiendseeker cares about bounty counters, Chevelle cares about bounty counters, or maybe you're building around Shay as your commander. There's a couple of other cards like Bounty Boards can put bounty counters on things, Termination Facilitator can put bounty counters on things. So there are some interesting support pieces to either build around this card, or in the case of Mathis, run Shay in the 99. So Shay, I'm really intrigued to see what this card does in Modern. I expect it's a card that most of the time doesn't see any play, but I do think there's going to be specific metas or matchups where the first ability could make it a really important sideboard card. We also got a new Night Lord in Haytham Kenway. So 4 mana 3/3. It's a legendary human knight. It has protection from assassins. It says other knights you control have +2/+2 and have protection from assassins, and then when it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, exile up to one target creature that player controls until it leaves the battlefield. So Haytham, this card's kind of funny. So on one hand, it is a really big pump ability, right? For 4 mana, you're getting a 3/3 that double anthems your knights. It's like 2 Marshals as Elfir, or it's like the ultimate of History of Benalia, the last lore counter, which is a really big boost of power. I don't think this is going to happen at Modern. This is more of a commander thing, but if you can play a bunch of knights and play this, you might be able to just one-shot someone. +2/+2 is a really nice reward. And then it's also kind of a Fiend Hunter, one that scales for commander by hitting each opponent, although awkwardly, in some ways that's kind of a drawback, as strange as that sounds. So yes, being able to temporarily remove one of your opponent's things, or one of each of your opponent's things, is actually pretty powerful. The problem is, if you lock away your opponent's commanders or their good threats underneath Haytham, they're probably going to really focus on killing Haytham, which means not only do they get back their stuff, but you're going to lose your Lord. So in some ways, I kind of wish my Lord wasn't a Fiend Hunter, because Fiend Hunters tend to die a lot. They just eat removal all the time. So a little bit awkward that your Lord's going to be the biggest target for removal. So I expect this card probably isn't going to live a lot, but it does seem like a pretty sweet option, either as your build around Knight Commander, where you just play this in the command zone and you always have removal, you always have the sword in the command zone, or in the 99 of any Knight deck, like Sidar, Jabari, Alanda, and Azar, even the Council of 4. So Haytham Kenway, pretty sweet design, also pretty flavorful. Protection from assassins is going to matter like 0.0001% of the time, but it works with the theme of Assassin's Creed. We also got probably the most important card from the set in Templar Knight. So Templar Knight, 2 mana 3/1. It's a human knight. It's not legendary for once. It is Vigilance. You can pay 1 and tap 5 untapped attacking creatures you control named Templar Knight to search your library for a legendary artifact card, put it on the battlefield and shuffle, and then your deck can have any number of cards named Templar Knight. So this card, I expect, is going to be pretty expensive. We've seen in the past with Slime Against Humanity, Persistent Petitioners, Rat Colonies, these cards that you can play any number of in your deck, they always tend to be really expensive, because if you're going to build a deck around them, you probably need 20 copies, 30 copies, 40 copies, some huge number of these cards. And I think in some ways, this is actually going to be even more expensive than Slime Against Humanity, Persistent Petitioners, Rat Colony, for a couple of reasons. First, it's an uncommon, when traditionally these are printed at common. Second, it's coming in this Universes Beyond Assassin's Creed set that is sandwiched between Modern Horizons 3, which is super hyped, and Bloomborough, which is super hyped. So I'm not sure how much of the set's actually going to be opened. In some ways, it reminds me the most of Nazgul. I know Nazgul, you only play 9 copies of them in your deck, and you play any number of Templar Knights, but we've seen Nazgul be, what, $10, $8 a copy? Even though you only ever need 9 of them, I imagine Templar Knight might actually be in that price range. I think this could end up easily being a $10 uncommon, just because people are going to need a lot of them, and because of how the set release is lining up. As far as playing the card, the thing I'm most excited about is it might finally make Circle of Loyalty playable. Imagine this. You get 5 Templar Knights, you attack with them all, and then after you attack, you pay 1 and tap it, you tutor out your Circle of Loyalty, it pumps all your Templar Knights up to 4/4s. If you think about it, 4 times 5, that's 20 damage, right? That's enough to just one-shot kill your opponent. So I think we may have broken Modern with a Templar Knight. Although I will say, I think the best thing to do is just play a bunch of these and then grab like a Chroma's Memorial to just pump your team, protect your team, get in a ton of damage. You could snag a Mindslaver and steal someone's turn, an Immortal Sun. So being able to tutor up a legendary artifact, actually a pretty powerful effect. And I like that 5 is kind of a realistic number. Like, yeah, it's not easy to draw 5 copies of Templar Knight and keep him on the battlefield, but it also doesn't feel completely unrealistic. So Templar Knight, If you open some of this set, I expect this is going to be the expensive uncommon from the set, because these kind of cards are always expensive, plus you can do some pretty sweet things with it. We also got Eivor Wolfkiss, so a Naya 6-mana 7/6 with Trample and Haste. It's a human assassin warrior, and then it says, when it deals combat damage to a player, you mill that many cards, then you may put a saga card and or a land card from among them on the battlefield. So Eivor is 6 mana. I think it's just too expensive for Modern. But the upside here is really high. Like, the dream scenario is you play this, attack with it, you get in a hit with it, deal a bunch of damage to your opponent, and then you mill over like Gaia's Cradle in the World spell. You get this land that makes a bunch of mana and this 7-mana saga essentially for free just by attacking. I think this is really supposed to be a saga commander. I think if you want to play Naya sagas, this is a pretty sweet option. You can get a Fall of Thran, Elspeth Conquers Death, Fable the Mirror Breaker. There's plenty of good sagas in the color. And this, every turn it gets in a hit, is going to be ramping you and putting a saga into play. So I think that's kind of the main use of this card. So a little bit too expensive for Modern, but a fun saga commander if that's your thing. Moving into the realm of others, so not assassins, not knights, just other stuff. We got Sigurd, Jarl of Ravensthorpe. I swear to God, I don't know how Assassin's Creed managed to do this, but I thought Magic made some complicated names. Somehow Assassin's Creed is way worse than Magic by a million miles. So it's a 3-mana 3/3 Naya human warrior. It's a legendary creature, of course. It has Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink, and it has Boast of 1. Put a lore counter on target saga you control, or remove 1 from it. So you can activate the ability only once each turn, and only if you attacked with it. And then when you put a lore counter on a saga you control, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 other target creature. When I first read this card, I actually thought it might be kind of good, but I missed that it only put the counter on other creatures. So I thought you could kind of snowball this into a really big threat with sagas. Doesn't actually work that way. It's always going to be a 3/3, but you can put the counter on other things. So Sigurd, you can do some modern-y things with this, like removing counters from Saga is something we've seen on the very fringes of the format before, like being able to play a Fable the Mirror Breaker, make the Goblin Shaman, it goes up to the second lore counter, you get to do some looting, then you could use Sigurd to remove the lore counter, you go back to the first one to make a Goblin Shaman, then you go back up and loot again, and then you just keep moving back and forth to add value forever. Same with Urza Saga, you can keep removing the counter and just making a construct every turn again and again and again. So I don't know if this is going to be competitive in Modern, but it is kind of cute. In Commander, I just want to Fall of Thran, people. You play this, you play Fall of Thran, you blow up all the lands, and you keep using Sigurd to remove the second lore counter to go back to the first one to blow up all the lands again and again and again, and just essentially lock anyone out of playing Magic forever. Your play group will hate you, but it does sound like a hilarious way to build around it. So Sigurd, pretty cool design. We see a very heavy saga theme in this set. So if you want to build like a saga commander deck, getting lots of sweet new options. We also got another one of the real life characters in this set, and also another one of the serialized card in Sokrates, Athenian Teacher. So Sokrates, 3-mana 0/4, Azorius Human Advisor. It has Defender, it has Hexproof as long as it's untapped, and then its abilities is Sokrates Dialogue, which is tap it until end of turn, target creature gains. If this creature would deal combat damage to a player, prevent that damage, this creature's controller and that player each draw half that many cards rounded down. This sounds very convoluted. That wording is very convoluted, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Essentially what this is you get this Defender Hexproof most of the time creature that can tap to prevent all the damage one creature would deal this turn. So it's kind of like an Azorius ploy, or like a fog for one creature, essentially. So you defog the attack of a single creature, but it's even better than that, or worse than that. Let's say your opponent's attacking you with a Murktide Regent. That's a 8/8. You activate your Sokrates, you take 0 damage from the Murktide, you are going to draw half the amount of damage that Murktide would have dealt, and your opponent is also going to draw half the amount of damage that Murktide would have dealt. So you draw 4 cards, your opponent would draw 4 cards. So it's kind of like a secret rendezvous almost. If you're using this on your opponent's creatures, you're going to be drawing cards, the opponent's going to be drawing cards. In Commander, that might be fine, right? Like your opponent might be okay with not taking damage if it means drawing a bunch of cards. I imagine you could politicize this pretty well, where you'll be like, okay, attack me with your big thing. I'll activate my Sokrates. You can draw a bunch of cards. Maybe you'll draw the answer we need to the threat, the arch enemy enemy has at the table. The other trick of this card is you can just target your own creatures with it. Maybe you have the Murktide, but rather than dealing damage, you'd rather draw some cards. So you can activate Sokrates on your Murktide. And the way it's worded, if this creature would deal combat damage to a player, prevent that damage, this creature's controller and that player each draw that many cards. In this instance, you are going to be this creature's controller, and you're going to be that player, which means you're going to draw half the amount of damage times 2, so you're going to draw equal to all the damage. So essentially, if you prevent the damage of your own threat, you just draw cards equal to the amount of damage it would have dealt, which can be a huge amount of card advantage. If you use this on a big threat, you're just going to refill your hand by tapping your Sokrates, which actually seems really, really powerful. So Sokrates, I actually love this card. I think this is a card that I would jam in Commander quite a bit. I like the politics aspect of it. I like the amount of card advantage that it can generate. And it's a card that just doesn't really look threatening. You can leave it sit on the battlefield and people probably aren't really going to care to try to kill it. I don't think it can do anything in Modern. I mean, I hope I'm wrong because it's a pretty cool design. I hope it shows up in Modern somewhere. I'd be surprised if it did anything in Modern, but it does seem like a really fun political card or just a weird build around in Commander. We also got an interesting new land in Abstergo Entertainment. So it's a legendary land. It taps to make it colorless, or you can pay 1 and tap it to make 1 mana of any color, or you can pay 3 and tap it and exile it to return up to 1 target historic card from your graveyard to your hand, and then exile all graveyards. So this card's pretty intriguing. It's essentially Scavenger Grounds, with the downside being it's not a desert, and it's 1 more mana for the graveyard exiling mode, but it does have some upside. First, it has the upside that it can fix your mana, not exactly efficiently. Paying 1 and tapping this to make 1 mana, you're kind of spending 2 mana to make 1, but still there's going to be times when you just gotta do it. The other upside is you can get something back from your graveyard before you nuke the graveyards, which is kind of interesting. So if you're playing like an artifact deck, a legends deck, a saga deck, I think this is just better Scavenger Grounds. Scavenger Grounds is the card that I play somewhat often in Commander. I don't play it in every deck, but I do try to fit it in when I can, because I do think having Graveyard Hate in your deck is totally worth it if you can fit it. I think that in just a generic deck, I'm probably still playing Scavenger Grounds, in part because there's Sand Scout, which can tutor it up, and in part because it just costs less mana. But if I'm a deck that's built around any of Abstergo Entertainment's themes, like I'm Joda, I'm Dahada, I'm an artifact deck like Osgard or Reddy that's filling my graveyard, I'm a saga deck like Tom Bombadil, then I think this is a big upgrade over Scavenger Grounds, and maybe even a staple for that deck, because you get the upside of this one-shot Eternal Witness style reanimation, and the upside of nuking all the graveyards to slow down your opponent. So I think this card is actually a really, really nice option for the decks that are built around its theme. We also got a card that I think is kind of just ridiculous in Caduceus Staff of Hermes. So it is a 3 mana white legendary equipment, and it says equip creature has lifelink, and then as long as you have 30 or more life, equip creature gets +5/+5. It has indestructible and prevent all damage that would be dealt to this creature, and it only equips for 2 white mana. So if you read this card, it actually shocked me that they printed it this way. It's worded like Serra Ascendant. Wizards has gotten rid of this wording. If you don't know Serra Ascendant, like 15 years ago they printed Serra Ascendant, and Serra Ascendant says if you have 30 or more life, it's essentially a 6/6 flying life flanker. Wizards printed this card before Commander existed. It was printed when the only formats that existed in Magic were formats where you started at 20 life. So essentially what Serra Ascendant said is, if you can get 10 points of life above your starting life total, you get this really powerful 1-drop. But Wizards has since gotten rid of that wording. Now, if they print a card like Serra Ascendant, what it normally says is, well, if you're at 10 points above your starting life total or 20 points above your starting life total, then you get the ability. The staff calls back to Serra Ascendant's ability. What this means is in Commander, this is just turned on right away, because in Commander you start at 40 life. This is a 3 mana equipment that's only 2 to equip that gives lifelink +5/+5, indestructible, and prevent all damage. That is an absurd equipment. If you think about what this is, it's Darksteel Plate mixed with Sword of Caldra, mixed with General Kabuto, mixed with, I guess, Poet's Quill. One of the most ridiculous equipments I've ever seen. Yes, there is a risk here. The risk is if you fall below 30 life, then it's just giving lifelink, and it becomes much less exciting, although the lifelink should help you get back over 30 life. And once you're above 30 life and have this on a creature, you can just leave it back on defense and have this massive, indestructible, prevent all damage, lifelinking creature to make sure that your life total stays high. So I think this card might actually be one of the most busted commander cards that I've seen in a minute. I think if you're playing a life gain deck, this card is just absurd. Like, people play Darksteel Plate to protect their commander. This is Darksteel Plate plus, assuming your deck that can stay above 30 life. So if you're playing Aloro or Bilbo, some life gain deck, it seems great. I think it's actually just good enough to play in an equipment deck. Like, maybe you're Nahiri or Kellen. I think since you start at 40 life, you can probably just play this, try to tutor it out and set it up and make sure that your life total stays high enough. Plus, my favorite part about this is it is one of the sweetest ways to combo with Pariah. If you don't know Pariah is this enchantment that says all damage that would be dealt to you is dealt to enchanted creature instead. So you probably see where this is going. If you get the staff on a creature and put Pariah on the creature, all damage that is dealt to you will instead go to the creature with Pariah and staff on it, except all damage that's dealt to that creature is going to be prevented, plus it's even indestructible. So essentially, you just can't take damage for as long as this combo stays on the battlefield. So this, I think, becomes immediately the best way to pull off the Pariah lock if you're interested. So Caduceus Staff of Hermes, the card's kind of wild. Like, I think this card was designed to be really, really good in Commander. In Modern, good in Soul Sisters, maybe? I'm honestly not sure if there's a deck that can use this in Modern. You could play it in like Stoneblade or something, right? But the problem is in those decks, you probably can't get up above 30 life. And then in a life gain deck, do you actually want to play this not especially synergistic equipment? So I'm not sure where this fits. I guess it could be a finisher in like Martyr proc or something where you're using Martyr of Sands to gain huge amount of life. And then hopefully this just goes on a random creature and you smash your opponent to death. Really high on it for Commander. Maybe some fringe brew around potential in Modern too. We also got a new Mythic God Artificer in the Capitoline Triad. So it's a 10 mana 7/7 colorless card, not an artifact, just colorless. It says this spell costs 1 less to cast for each historic card in your graveyard. So for every artifact, legend, and saga, you get a cost reduction, and then you can exile any number of historic cards from your graveyard with total mana value 30 or greater, and you get an emblem with creatures you control have base power and toughness of 9/9. So this card, I don't know how good this card's gonna be, right? It is 10 mana, you gotta fill your graveyard, you got a bunch of hoops to jump through to make it good. It's certainly a very notable card though. This is, I believe, the first non-planeswalker in the history of Magic the Gathering to make an emblem, and it is probably the most busted emblem that's ever been made. Like, making all your creatures into 9/9s is an incredibly huge reward. And if you don't know why the emblem thing matters, emblems, you cannot interact with them. There is no way to remove an emblem in all of Magic. So if you pull this off, your creatures are going to be 9/9s for the rest of the game, no matter what your opponent does. There is just no stopping that ability. So the question's going to be, can we actually pull this off? So I was thinking about this. So in a format like Modern, you can certainly get a lot of historic cards in your graveyard quickly. Mishra's Bauble, Chromatic Spheres, Chromatic Stars, these cheap artifacts that can sack themselves. So I think you can get the cost of this down pretty rapidly. The problem is these cards are all 0 or 1 mana value. So it's like Wizards designed the Triad to intentionally not just work with these cards. You can get all the Chromatic Spheres and Stars and Baubles in the world in the graveyard, and you're going to have a hard time exiling 30 mana value of spells to actually get the emblem. If this is just a, I don't know, 5 mana 7/7, even a 1 mana 7/7 on turn 5 or something, because it's going to take you some setup, it's not really that exciting of a card. You really need to be able to get the emblem as well. So I think this needs to go into some sort of like self-mill big thing style deck. I'm imagining you're like self-milling Metalwork Colossuses and Ulamogs or Dracos or Meosians, just really expensive artifact or legendary creatures. With these cards, you only need like 2 Dracos, 3 Metalwork Colossuses, 3 Ulamogs in the graveyard to be able to exile to get that emblem right away. So maybe this is actually like a ramp card where you're playing Tron or something similar, trying to get up enough mana that you're going to cast the Triad for like 7 mana, 8 mana, 9 mana, but just get a few of these really big, high mana value historic things in the graveyard to get the emblem and trust that the emblem's going to be able to win you the game. So it's going to be really interesting to see how people build around this card. In Commander, the challenge of the card is if you play it as your commander, you're a colorless deck, and I'm not sure how you like self-mill aggressively enough as a colorless deck to really make this work, the best bet might actually be like some sort of Carrot Clan Ironworks sacrifice style deck where you're just like playing and sacking a bunch of artifacts to fill your graveyard, and then you play this, hopefully at a big discount, and then you exile a bunch of stuff and make your things huge and use it to win the game. The other cool part of this card is you can't just play it in the 99. Like, maybe you're playing Dahana Binder of Wills or Kethis the Hidden Hand. These are both historic decks, right? They're built around legends that also can fill the graveyard pretty rapidly. So this could just be in the 99. You're already going to be filling your graveyard for Kethis, and it comes down when you're, able to make it work, and then you make your team into 9/9s and win the game. Could also work with like Cardor Ghost Chieftain, Sidisi Brewtime, or any sort of self-mill deck if you build around it a little bit. Like the typical Sidisi deck or Kadora deck, I'm not sure if enough of your things are historic to make it work, but if you want to make it work, you certainly could play more legends in the deck, more artifacts in the deck to power up your Capitoline Trio. So this card, it is wild. It is a super cool build around, probably the best against the odds card we've seen from the set so far. How good it's actually going to be remains to be seen, but it is definitely a super cool design. We also got Senu Keen-Eyed Protector, a 2-mana 2/1 legendary bird scout. It has flying and vigilance. You can tap it and exile it to gain 2 life and scry 2, and then when a legendary creature you control attacks and isn't blocked, if it's exiled, you can put it on the battlefield attacking. So Senu is kind of an intriguing card. So my first thought is maybe this one could make it in Modern. We've seen this Flowering of the White Tree deck on the fringes of Modern. If you don't know Flowering of the White Tree, 2-mana enchantment that gives legendary creatures you control +2/+1 in Ward 1. So if you get on Flowering of the White Tree, Senu is going to be a 4/2 flying Ward 1, which is kind of a really big threat. So you're playing Flowering, you're playing Mox Ambers, and then you're just playing a bunch of cheap legends, your Kytheons and Ragavans or whatever. Senu seems like a pretty interesting addition there. Like, it's a flyer, it's legendary, it works with all of your synergies. You got a bunch of legends, so if you need to, you can exile it to do some life gain and scrying, and then get it back as you attack with your legends. So I do think this card could serve a purpose in some sort of weird legendary aggro deck. It also works really well with Path to Exile. If you Path to Exile your Senu, it goes to exile, and then if you attack with your whatever legend and it goes unblocked, you're able to just put it back into play. So this might be the best creature to turn into ramp with Path to Exile, but that's worth keeping in mind. If you have any synergy that involves exiling your own creatures, Senu is going to be one of the best things to exile because you can always get it back later. We also got a new 4-mana legendary artifact. Don't worry, it's not the One Ring, but it is a pretty sweet card in Apple of Eden Isu Relic. So 4-mana legendary artifact, you can tap it and pay 4 life and sacrifice it to look at target opponent's hands and exile those cards face down. You may then play those cards this turn, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them. Until end of turn, whenever you play a land or cast a spell this way, its owner draws a card, and the beginning of the end step, return the exiled cards to their owner's hand, activate it only as a sorcery. If this pile of words has you confused, don't worry. Essentially what you're doing is you memory jar, but you memory jar your opponent's hand. So you sack the apple, you get to steal your opponent's hand for the turn. Whenever you cast a spell from your opponent's hand, they're going to get to draw a card to replace the card that you cast. And then on the end step, your opponent gets back whatever cards you didn't use from their hand. So is Apple of Eden good? And I think the answer is it could have uses. When you think about this, it's kind of like a Mindslaver, right? Except it's 4 mana instead of 10 mana. You can just fire this off. Of course, one of the downsides of this card is, let's say you play this on turn 4, then you crack it. You're not going to have any mana to cast your opponent's spell, so it's not really going to do anything. So you kind of need to play this on turn 4, not take any damage for a turn, or too much damage for a turn. So then the next turn you can pay for and activate it and mess with your opponent's stuff. So it might be a little bit tricky to use. It's probably going to need to go in some sort of big mana deck. A deck like Amulet Titan or Tron. They can just make a huge amount of mana, and then you can use this to do a hand check on your opponent, make sure they're not going to counter any of your things for a turn, kill any of your things for the turn, maybe even use some of their spells against them. Remember, we also have Karn the Great Creator in Modern, so this could be like a one-of sideboard option that you're just going to tutor out with Karn. Maybe you're playing Tron, and you just Karn this out in the right scenario, crack it to be able to steal your opponent's cards, mess up their hand, do the weird Mindslaver thing, and hopefully use that value to win the game. The other intriguing aspect is maybe this could be a Coffers card, because it works really well with Bowmasters and Shieldred. So if you read the card, remember, whenever you cast one of the spells that you memory jar from your opponent's hand, your opponent gets to draw a card. So this is supposed to be a drawback, right? Like, it's replacing the cards that you're casting of your opponents. However, If you have a Bowmasters out or a Shieldred the Apocalypse out, your opponent drawing a card might actually benefit you. So I could imagine like coffers, it can make a huge amount of mana, getting down a Bowmasters or a Shieldred or two, and then playing the apple, cracking the apple, and just like casting all of the opponent's spells to intentionally force your opponent to draw a bunch of cards during a pretty harmless time, since you control their hand anyway at the moment, and just burn your opponent out of the game with Bowmasters and Shieldred. So I don't know if that's a good plan, but it does sound like a hilarious way to win the game. So Apple of Eden, the card's super cool. Outside of the modern synergies we've been talking about, could also just be fun in like theft decks in Commander. Being able to just steal an opponent's hand for a turn is a really, really cool effect. In the world of lower rarity cards, a couple more free running cards that I think are actually pretty good, assuming you can free run them. Petty Larceny, 4 mana. Look at the top 2 cards of target's opponent's library. You can exile those cards face down. You can play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and a mana of any type can be spent to cast them, and you get a treasure token. So at 4 mana, maybe you play this in Gonti or something, some sort of dedicated theft deck. But when it's 2 mana, this card's kind of wild, right? 2 mana, make a treasure, steal the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck, and you can play them for the rest of the game, is really, really good. So if you're playing an assassin deck, I think this card is actually just really good. The other one that's like that is Eagle Vision. So 5 mana, draw 3 cards, except free running of 2. A 2 mana draw 3 is kind of off the charts. So if you're assassins, or just like some sort of deck that can get in with your commander consistently, I think this card is almost an auto include in your deck. We also got Bleeding Effect, which is a really cool card, but only for very narrow archetypes. So it's a 4 mana Orzhov enchantment that says the beginning of combat on your turn, creatures you control gain flying this turn. If a creature in your graveyard has flying, the same is true of First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. Essentially, it's like Soul Flayer. It Soul Flayers your entire team based on what you have in your graveyard. So if you're a keyword soup style deck, I think this is a very, very strong card. If you're the kind of deck that can support like a Soul Flayer, this is kind of great, right? If you're giving your entire team flying and double strike and indestructible, it's not going to take many turns to close out the game, but I do think you need to build around it. I don't think you can just jam this in any deck and trust that you're going to get the right keywords in the graveyard to make it work. So keep that in mind. In the right deck, a great card, but not a card for every deck. We also got some more sagas, some more equipment. Ezio Bresh Novice. This card I want to shout out because it was so close to being maybe modern playable. 2 mana 1/1. When it attacks, you put +1/+1 counter on it. And then as long as it has 2 or more counters on it, it gets first strike and it's assassin. It starts off as a human. This card I think really should have been 1 mana. I think at 2 mana, the card's just absolutely stone unplayable in every format. Like, you play it on turn 2, on turn 3 you attack, and it's a 2/2, and then on turn 4 you attack, and it's a 3/3. It's just nowhere close to being good enough, especially considering it dies to Bowmasters. If this was a 1-drop, though, it'd be kind of cool, right? You play it on turn 1, turn 2 you attack, it grows to a 2/2, kind of like a Goblin Guide, and then the next turn you attack, it becomes a 3/3. I actually think this card would be perfectly fine at 1 mana in Modern. As it is, I don't know what you do with this card. I guess it's like supposed to be a flavorful card of an iconic Assassin's Creed character, but as far as being a Magic card, it doesn't seem especially useful. We also got some new starter deck cards. So one of the products coming along with Assassin's Creed is these starter decks that are supposed to be, you get these decks, it has 2 decks in them, and you just play them right out of the box, and they're almost like the Planeswalker decks used to be. So these cards, I don't think any of them are especially useful. Like, I don't think they're going to be, played in any competitive format, but I will shout out this product just because if you're going to do Universes Beyond, a product designed to bring new players that have never played Magic into the game, having an easy to pick up starter product is a great idea. Something that an Assassin's Creed fan who has never played Magic before can just go to the Walmart checkout line, buy something for $20 or whatever, and sit down and play a game of Magic with kind of simplified cards that they can actually understand seems really, really essential. So even though the product is very much not for me, and if you're watching this video, it's probably not for you, it is a product that I'm glad exists for new players. Finally today, we got some reprints, starting with 2 of the biggest ones. Sword of Light and Shadow, Sword of Feast and Famine, both iconic $40 cards. And I gotta say, that Sword of Light and Shadow, the borderless version, might be one of my favorite sword arts of all time. I don't care anything about Assassin's Creed, never played Assassin's Creed, but that card just looks so incredibly good. This is the sort of light and shadow art that I'm going to play for the rest of time because it is just, oh my goodness, what a beautiful, perfect representation of sort of light and shadow. Also, these cards are both like 40 bucks or something, so good value in the reprint slot. We also got all the Horizon lands coming back with this kind of panorama style art. Waterlog Grove, Sign Clearing, Nurturing Beatlands, Sunbaked Canyon, Fiery Islet. These cards do see some modern play. They were just reprinted in Doctor Who, some of them, so they're not like super valuable, but still they look pretty cool and have a decent amount of value. We also got Royal Assassin returning. I was talking about this card on stream, and I think Royal Assassin, it's one of those cards that splits Magic right in the middle. If you played Magic, started playing in the first 15 years of Magic, Royal Assassin is probably an iconic card for you, and you probably are super nostalgic, remember it fondly. On the other hand, if you started playing in the second half of Magic, the last 15 years, you might not even know what this card is. Like, I think it's been reprinted once since M2012, which was like almost 15 years ago. So if you're a newer player, you're probably like, Royal Assassin, this card kind of sucks. Why would I play a 3-drop 1/1 that has to lose Summoning Sickness and tap to destroy a tap creature? So it's really funny to see just the breakdown, like when you start to play has such a big influence over what you think of this card. But the flavor flits, one of these is a bundle promo. Royal Assassin, not going to do anything in competitive play, but it is a cool old card. We also got more Rest in Peace coming back. Assassin's Trophy, another card that got a reprint recently, but is still pretty useful. Murder with maybe my favorite murder art. That guy's about to get it. Things are not going well for that guy on the stage. Cathartic Reunion coming back as well. And that brings us to the end of our daily Assassin's Creed spoilers for today. So, oh, that was a lot to talk about. Let me know what you think of this set. What cards, if any, do you think can make an impact on Modern? What are you building in Commander? What's your hype level for this set? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more Magic? We can check out the video where I explain the MTG Iceberg here, or maybe the Simic Eldrazi deck we played in Modern.